Look closely at the photograph. Don't glance. Look. It is dated 1860, perhaps 1865. The location is St. Petersburg, or maybe San Francisco, or perhaps Melbourne. It hardly matters. The architecture is uniform, a grand, sweeping Greco-Roman imposition of stone and geometry that defies the crude technology of the alleged builders. But ignore the columns for a moment. Ignore the domes that scrape the grey sky. Look at the street. It is empty. A city built for millions, inhabited by ghosts. A ghost town of granite. Where are the people? Where are the logistics of life? But we are told this is the result of long exposure times. We are told the movement of the bustling crowds blurred into invisibility, erased by the primitive shutter speeds of the daguerreotype. It is a convenient explanation. It is a tidy academic dismissal. But look at the shadows. The shadows are sharp. The trees are distinct. A horse stands tethered, perfectly frozen in silver nitrate. If the horse is visible, where is the rider? If the shadows are crisp, where is the chaotic motion of a metropolis in the throes of the Industrial Revolution? Ask yourself why a civilization capable of erecting mountains of masonry could not capture its own citizens on film. Or ask yourself something darker. What if the people weren't there yet? What if the city was waiting? Walk with me to the nearest historic district in your city. Find the oldest building, the one with the heavy lintels and the brickwork that sings of a lost precision. Look down. Look at the pavement. You will see a window, not a cellar vent, a full sash window, half buried by the concrete, suffocating against the asphalt. We are told these are coal chutes or light wells designed to illuminate basements. We accept this. We walk over them every day. But stop. Crouch down. Look at the lintel. Look at the craftsmanship. Why would a master mason, a man whose livelihood depended on the integrity of the arch, build a window into the dirt? Why would an architect design a ground floor that requires a ladder to exit? This is not design. This is burial. This is a first floor that became a basement. The earth rose, or the mud came, and we, the inheritors, simply paved over the catastrophe and called it a design feature. We are living on top of a graveyard of architecture, walking on the roofs of the world that came before. The official narrative asks us to believe in a global lapse of judgment, a centuries-long era where humanity collectively decided to bury the first floors of their greatest structures. Not this, not incompetence, something else, geology, or weaponized geology. Consider the Singer Building, once the tallest building in the world, a red sandstone needle piercing the New York sky, a cathedral of commerce. It was completed in 1908. It was demolished in 1968. Gone. Pulverized. We are told it became obsolete. Obsolete. A structure built to last 1,000 years, adorned with marble, bronze, and the kind of craftsmanship we cannot replicate today with $1 billion budget, was deemed trash after 60 years. Ask yourself, who throws away a palace? We do not recycle the pyramids. We do not tear down the Pantheon because the heating bill is too high, unless the people tearing it down did not build it, unless they had no emotional attachment to the stone because the sweat in the mortar was not their own. We act like squatters. We inhabit these grand carcasses, these inherited shells, and when we can no longer maintain the advanced systems of heating, ventilation, and vibration energy that we do not understand, we tear them down and replace them with glass boxes. We are not the builders. We are the tenants who lost the landlord's manual. The Singer building was not demolished. It was erased. It was evidence. They called it the White City. The World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago. We are told that in a swamp in the middle of a harsh Midwest winter, men with horses and wagons built a neoclassical utopia of such scale and grandeur that it rivals imperial Rome. They built it, we are told, in less than 2 years, and they built it out of staff, a mixture of plaster, hemp, and straw. Temporary, disposable, a stage set. Ask yourself if you have ever seen a plaster facade support a dome that weighs 200 tons. Ask yourself how a temporary city, destined for demolition, was fitted with electric lighting, running water, and a sewage system that surpassed the permanent cities of the era. We are asked to believe that the greatest architectural achievement of the 19th century was a lie, a hallucination of plaster meant to last 6 months, and then, conveniently, it burned down. Fire is the great editor of history. The Library of Alexandria, the Smithsonian fire, the San Francisco fire, the records burn, the temporary buildings burn, the evidence turns to ash, and we are left with the narrative. But look at the photos of the ruins. Look at the steel girders twisted by heat. Look at the blocks of stone, not plaster, stone, scattered in the wreckage. You cannot melt a plaster column. You cannot shatter a hemp facade into granite blocks. They didn't build the White City in 1893. They found it. They renovated it. They threw a party to celebrate the conquest, and then they destroyed it so we wouldn't ask who really laid the foundations. Zoom out. Further. Look at the map of the world. Look at the geometry etched into the earth, the star forts. We find them in the Netherlands, in Japan, in Florida, in Russia. Identical fractals of stone and water. We are told they are military fortifications designed to deflect cannonballs, the angles, the mathematics, the perfect symmetry, all for the crude purpose of war. But look at the scale. Some of these stars are so massive they can only be appreciated from an altitude that humans could not achieve when they were allegedly built. Why design a weapon that is also a semantic frequency pattern? Why prioritize sacred geometry over simple, thick walls? And why is the technology of their construction identical across continents that were supposedly disconnected? The official story relies on the Bastian trace theory, a linear evolution of military defense, but the star forts do not evolve. They appear fully formed, perfect in their complexity, everywhere at once. They are not shields. They are circuitry. They are capacitors, a global grid of energy generation, deactivated, flooded, and rebranded as relics of war. We look at a motherboard and see a city. We look at a star fort and see a bunker. We are looking through the wrong lens. And then there are the children, the founderlings, the orphan trains. Between 1854 and 1929, hundreds of thousands of children were transported from the cities of the East Coast to the rural Midwest. We are told they were abandoned, the surplus population of a booming immigrant wave. But look at the numbers. Look at the faces. Thousands upon thousands of children, parents unknown, history erased, shipped like livestock to repopulate the empty farms. Where did the adults go? A civilization does not simply misplace a generation of parents unless there was a rupture, a break in the lineage. The inheritors needed a workforce, but they needed a workforce with no memory. A child who does not know their grandfather cannot ask about the building with the giant doors. A child who has been severed from their heritage accepts the history book as gospel. The orphan trains were not a charity. They were a resettlement program. They were the seeding of a post-cataclysmic world with a population slate wiped clean of the old knowledge. These children were raised to believe they were building a new world, when in reality they were merely dusting off the old one. We are the descendants of the orphans. We have forgotten because we were designed to forget. Open the Encyclopedia Britannica, not the one on your shelf. The first edition, 1771. Look at the map of Asia. There is a country there. It is not China. It is not Russia. It is vast. It spans from the Urals to the Pacific, from the Arctic to India. It is labelled Grand Tartary. It has cities. It has a flag, an owl or a griffin on a yellow field. It has a government. It is described as a formidable empire. Now, open a textbook from 1950. It is gone, dissolved, retroactively absorbed into the expanding blob of the Russian Empire or the Qing dynasty. How does an empire the size of a continent vanish from the collective memory in 200 years? We are told Tartary was merely a geographical descriptor, a vague term for the place where the barbarians live, but the maps show cities, capital cities, Cambelu, Grostina, cities that no longer exist, or cities that have been renamed and diminished. We are witnessing a forensic crime scene where the body has been dissolved in acid. The name was erased, the people were dispersed or destroyed, the buildings were repurposed, and the timeline was stitched back together to hide the scar. We call it history. They called it damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Let us return to the interior. The fireplace, the hearth, in the great mansions of the Gilded Age, in the palaces of the Tsars, we see fireplaces large enough to roast an ox, and yet there is no chimney. Or the chimney is a tiny cosmetic flute that could not possibly draw the smoke of a fire that size. We are told these were for wood, but anyone who has burned wood knows the physics of draught and smoke. These fireplaces often have metal backings, intricate iron plates with no soot. They are not combustion chambers. They are resonators. They are focal points for an energy source we have lost. Radium, atmospheric electricity, the ether. We mocked the concept of the ether, drove it out of physics, labelled it pseudoscience. But look at the metal poles on the roofs of these buildings. We call them lightning rods. We assume they are there to conduct a strike away from the building. What if they were there to conduct energy into it? Look at the power lines. Look at the grid. A chaotic, tangled web of copper and plastic strung across wooden poles like a desperate afterthought. We are told this is the pinnacle of human achievement, the nervous system of modern man. But go back to the images of the late 19th century. Look at the Victorian street lamps. They do not have wires. They do not have gas lines. They are freestanding pillars of light, topped with ornate glass-encased globes that seem to glow with a soft, ethereal radiance. We are told they were gas lamps, but where are the pipes? Where is the infrastructure of combustion? We find accounts of luminous towers and atmospheric illumination. We find the work of Nikola Tesla, a man whose name has been partially rehabilitated only because his true discoveries were too vast to be entirely suppressed. He spoke of the earth as a resonant circuit. He spoke of pulling power from the air itself. And then his financiers withdrew. His laboratory burned. His name was scrubbed from the patents. Ask yourself why we pay for electricity by the kilowatt hour, when the very ground we walk upon is a battery of infinite potential. The wires are not for delivery. The wires are for control. The wires are a meter, a leash, a way to ensure that the energy of the world is sold back to us at a premium. The Tartarian grid was wireless. It was free. It was omnipresent. And that is why it had to be dismantled. Step inside the cathedral, the Duomo, the Basilica. The very words vibrate with a weight that suggests something more than a mere meeting house for the faithful. Look at the height. Look at the vaulted ceilings, the gold leaf, the massive pipe organs that look less like musical instruments and more like industrial machinery. We are told these were built for the glory of God by peasants who lived in mud huts and died of the plague. We are told they were built to inspire awe in the illiterate. But look at the acoustics. A whisper in one corner carries to the other with mathematical precision. This is not for sermons. This is for vibration. This is for frequency. The organ is a sonic weapon, or perhaps a sonic healer. The rose windows are not just art. They are cymatic patterns frozen in glass, tuned to specific Hertzian waves. Ask yourself why every great city on earth has a cluster of these massive, over-engineered stone resonance chambers. If they were truly houses of worship, why do they all follow the same blueprint of an energy plant? We are told the pipe organ was invented to play hymns. Not this, not hymns, something else. The manipulation of the human biofield through sound. The cathedral was a hospital, a charging station, a harmonizer. The religion came later. The pews were added to turn a laboratory into a theatre. The priests took the keys and told us the humming in the walls was the voice of a ghost. The official history of the 19th century is a history of progress. It is a narrative of invention, of the steam engine, of the railroad, of the sudden inexplicable explosion of human capability. But look at the photographs of the great excavations. We see men with shovels, we see horses with carts, and we see them standing in front of ruins that would challenge a modern hydraulic excavator. We are told they are building the subway, building the sewers, building the foundations of the new world. But look at the walls they are uncovering. They are already finished. They are polished. They are ancient. They are digging the mud out of the structures, not putting the structures into the ground. This is the great reset of the 1800s. A global inundation, the mud flood, had buried the lower levels of the previous civilization. The industrialists of the 19th century were not builders. They were salvagers. They were the clean-up crew. They moved into the half-buried cities, cleared the debris from the upper floors, and claimed the glory for themselves. They took the credit for the plumbing they merely unclogged. They took the credit for the tunnels they merely found. We are told the London Underground was a feat of Victorian engineering. What if it was a feat of Tartarian engineering that the Victorians simply inherited and electrified? The timeline is a lie, designed to hide the fact that we are living in the ruins of a much greater world. Where did the dissenters go? When the narrative was being rewritten, when the orphans were being sorted, when the buildings were being renamed, what happened to those who remembered? Look at the explosion of asylums in the 19th century. Massive palatial complexes built with the same neoclassical grandeur as the government buildings. They were called insane asylums. We are told They were a humanitarian response to a growing mental health crisis. But look at the intake records. People were committed for religious excitement, for political agitation, for reading too many books. They were the ones who wouldn't stop talking about the old world. They were the ones who pointed at the buried windows and asked why. The asylums were not hospitals. They were prisons for the memory holders. They were processing centres where the last remnants of the pre-flood consciousness were lobotomized, drugged and discarded. This is the institutional erasure of the witness. If you couldn't be re-educated like the children on the trains, you were diagnosed. The architectural majesty of the asylum served a dual purpose. It was a repurposed Tartarian structure used to house the very people who knew its true origin, a cruel irony of stone and iron. The cartography of the past is not a record of ignorance. It is a record of a different reality. For centuries, every map produced in Europe and Asia showed California as an island. We are told this was a persistent cartographic error, a mistake that was repeated by the world's most sophisticated explorers for over 100 years. Ask yourself if a navigator whose life depended on the accuracy of his charts would continue to make the same mistake for a century. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if the geography changed? We are taught that the Earth changes over millions of years in a slow, agonizing crawl of tectonic plates, but the maps suggest something else. They suggest a world of rapid, violent shifts. They suggest a world where islands disappear, where inland seas evaporate, and where continents are reshaped in a single lifetime. The erasure of Tartaria is not just the erasure of a nation, it is the erasure of a catastrophe. To admit that Tartaria existed is to admit that the world can be broken. To admit that the maps were right is to admit that the stable ground we stand on is a recent development. They keep us in a state of chronological provincialism, making us believe that the world has always looked exactly as it does now. It is a comforting lie that keeps us from looking for the scars of the last upheaval. Look at the Great Wall, one of the seven wonders, a barrier meant to keep out the barbarians from the north. But look at the battlements. Look at the crenellations, the notched gaps for archers and defenders. In many of the oldest sections, the openings face south. They face into China. Why would a wall built to protect China have its defences facing the people it is supposed to be protecting? Ask yourself who the real barbarians were. The wall was not built by the Chinese to keep out the Tartars. It was built by the Tartars to keep out the encroaching forces of the New World Order coming from the south. It was a border wall of a different empire entirely, but the victors write the history books. They took the wall, they reversed the narrative, and they turned a Tartarian defence line into a Chinese monument. It is the ultimate act of historical theft, not just the land, not just the stone, but the very purpose of the structure has been inverted. This is the pattern of the erasure. Take the evidence of the old world and rebrand it as the foundation of the new. The size of the world has changed. Look at the doors of the old world. Look at the massive portals of the cathedrals, the oversized steps of the courthouses, the ceiling heights that defy any logical need for ventilation. We are told this was grandeur, a way to make the common man feel small. But what if it was proportional? What if the grandeur was simply ergonomics for a population that was larger than us? We find accounts of giants in every culture, in every mythology, on every continent. And we find the physical evidence, skeletons 7, 8, 9 feet tall, unearthed in the mounds of the Ohio Valley, in the caves of the Caucasus, in the deserts of the West. And then we see the pattern of disappearance. The Smithsonian Institution arrives. The bones are packed into crates. The local newspapers are silenced. The evidence vanishes into the vaults. Ask yourself why the existence of larger humans is such a threat to the establishment. It is because it shatters the theory of linear evolution. It suggests that we are not the pinnacle of humanity, but the survivors of a decline. We are the shrunken remnants, living in the oversized house of our ancestors, pretending the furniture was always this big. The narrative of prehistory is a vacuum designed to swallow the truth. They give us Stone Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age to make the past feel primitive, distant, and irrelevant. They tell us that before the Greeks and the Romans, there was nothing but nomadic tribes and animal skins. But the stones tell a different story. The polygonal masonry of Peru, the pyramids of Giza, the submerged structures of Yonaguni, they all speak of a global high-technology civilization that existed before the beginning of history. This was the first Tartaria, the source code, the world that was destroyed by the first deluge. We are the third or fourth iteration of a civilization that keeps reaching for the stars and keeps being slapped back down into the mud. Each time, the survivors gather the scraps of the old knowledge, build a few more cathedrals, and then the reset button is pressed. The history we are taught is only the last 300 years of a million-year cycle. We are being kept in a state of perpetual amnesia, unable to see the pattern, because we are forbidden from looking at the scale. Consider the lighthouse, a beacon of safety, a triumph of optics. We are told the Fresnel was a revolutionary 19th century invention that allowed a small lamp to project light for miles. But look at the lens itself. It looks like a part of a machine. It looks like a high-energy concentrator. Many of these lighthouses are built on the foundations of much older towers, often in the same star fort geometry we see elsewhere. What if the lighthouse wasn't a warning to ships? What if it was a transmission tower, a part of the global wireless grid, using the conductivity of the coastline to send energy across the oceans? The light was a byproduct, a secondary function. We have turned a world-spanning communication and energy network into a series of quaint maritime landmarks. We look at the lens and see a lantern. The Tartarians looked at it and saw a relay. We are a civilization that found a smartphone and used it as a paperweight. In the end, we are left with the silence of the empty streets in the 1860s photographs, the silence of the buried windows, the silence of the missing empire. We are told that the world is a known quantity, that every mystery has been solved by a man in a lab coat with a government grant. But the anomalies are still there, hiding in plain sight. They are in the red bricks of your downtown, in the impossible geometry of the local church, in the suspicious gaps in your family tree. Ask yourself if you are ready to see the world not as it is described, but as it is. What if the progress of the last 2 centuries has actually been a slow, controlled retreat from a much higher state of being? What if the Great Reset is not a conspiracy of the future, but a recurring tragedy of the past? We are the inheritors of a stolen world, walking through the corridors of a palace we are told is a basement. The faces of Tartaria are our own faces, reflected in the glass of a history that was shattered and glued back together in the wrong order. The truth is not hidden, it is simply not seen, and the moment you begin to see it, the world you thought you knew begins to dissolve. What if everything you were told was a lie? What if the barbarians were the heroes? What if the end has already happened? The silence of the archive is not a void. It is a presence. It is a weight. When you walk through the hallowed halls of a national library, you are told you are standing at the summit of human memory. But look at the classification systems. Look at the restricted sections. Look at the thousands of boxes of unprocessed papers that have remained unprocessed for 100 years. This is institutional gatekeeping masquerading as a lack of funding. We are told that history is a complete record, but it is actually a sieve. Only what is deemed safe for the current paradigm is allowed to pass through. The rest is labelled as fringe, anomaly, or pseudo-history. Ask yourself why the discovery of a single copper coin in an Egyptian tomb can rewrite a decade of research, but the discovery of a 1,000-year-old steel foundry in the American Ohio Valley is ignored. It is not about the evidence, it is about the narrative. The narrative requires a world that began in the cradle of the Middle East and moved progressively westward toward enlightenment. It does not allow for a global, hyper-advanced empire that existed outside this linear path. Tartaria is the glitch in the matrix. It is the data point that refuses to be smoothed over. The maps are not just paper and ink, they are claims of ownership. When the cartographers of the 1700s labelled the vast interior of Asia as Tartary, they were acknowledging a geopolitical reality that the modern mind has been trained to reject. We are told that these maps were simply inaccurate, that the cartographers were filling in blanks with fanciful names, but look at the detail. Look at the mountain ranges, the river systems, the meticulously plotted city coordinates. These were not guesses, these were surveys. The erasure of Tartaria from the maps was not a correction, it was a conquest. It was the cartographic equivalent of burning a flag. By removing the name, they removed the claim. By removing the claim, they removed the people. What remains is a wilderness ready to be discovered by the explorers of the new era. This is the colonial playbook. First, you erase the map. Then, you erase the history. Finally, you erase the evidence. Ask yourself how many newly discovered lands were actually just reoccupied territories. Examine the monuments in your city. Truly examine them. Often you will see a stark contrast between the base and the figure it supports. You will find a massive, weathered, granite pedestal of exquisite craftsmanship topped by a relatively crude bronze statue of a 19th century general or politician. The scales are wrong, the styles are mismatched. Not this, not a cohesive work of art. Something else, a repurposing. The pedestals are the foundations of the old world, the remnants of statues that were torn down and melted during the transition. The new heroes were placed on top of the old glory to legitimize their rule. It is a parasitic form of architecture. We see it in the victory arches that pepper European capitals. We are told they were built to commemorate specific battles, but look at the weathering. Look at the erosion on the lower levels compared to the crisp inscriptions on the top. They didn't build the arches, they found them. They scraped off the old names, chiselled in their own victories, and told the public they had built a monument to themselves. We are living in a world of second-hand glory. Standing on pedestals, we no longer have the skill to carve. The definition of sanity is a political tool. In the mid-1800s, there was a sudden and dramatic rise in the number of people committed to asylums for delusions of grandeur. Many of these patients claimed to be royalty or to have come from a world of light and machines. We dismiss them as the broken byproducts of a harsh era. But what if their delusion was simply memory? What if they were the last survivors of the Tartarian upper class, stripped of their titles, their property and their history, and then locked away so their stories wouldn't contaminate the new population? The asylum was the ultimate tool of the Great Reset. It was a place where the truth could be labelled as a symptom. If you remembered the wireless power, you were manic. If you remembered the empire of the griffin, you were schizophrenic. If you refused to accept the new timeline, you were incurable. The architecture of the asylum, vast, intimidating, and geometric, was designed to crush the spirit and reinforce the power of the new regime. It was a factory for the production of normal citizens. The doors. Always the doors. Why are the entrances to our oldest post offices, courthouses, and banks 15 feet tall? We are told it was to allow for the passage of air or to create a sense of importance. But look at the handles. Look at the height of the locks. On many original doors, the hardware has been moved down, leaving visible scars where the original fittings were placed, well above the reach of a modern man. We are told this was decorative, not stylistic, functional. These buildings were designed for a taller race. When the new, shorter population moved in, they had to modify the world to fit their reach. They added steps. They lowered handles. They built dropped ceilings inside grand halls to save on heating. We are like children playing in an adult's house, frustrated by the scale and desperate to hide our inadequacy by pretending the house was built for us. The giants of the old world were not mythological. They were the architects. We are the inheritors who can't reach the top shelf. The great fires of the 19th century were not accidents. London, Moscow, Chicago, Boston, San Francisco. One by one, the architectural gems of the old world were turned to ash. We are told it was the result of poor building codes and wooden structures, but look at the photos of the aftermath. You see brick and stone buildings, fireproof structures, reduced to fine white powder. You see steel beams twisted into pretzels. Wood fires do not reach the temperatures required to liquefy granite or vaporize steel. This was not a candle tipped over by a cow. This was urban clearance on a global scale. The fires were a weapon of the reset, a way to destroy the impossible technology and the inconvenient records housed within the old world cities. The earthquakes that preceded many of these fires were likely the result of the same technology that once powered the grid, turned against the population to soften the target. Once the city was in ruins, the planners moved in, built over the rubble, and established the new, simplified world. The fires didn't just burn buildings, they burned the evidence of who we were. The world's fairs were the funeral pyres of the old world. They were not expositions of progress, they were expositions of the spoils. Each fair was a temporary city, built, they claim, for a few months, and then demolished. But look at the technology on display. At the 1901 Pan American Exposition, there was a temple of music that was bathed in more light than the rest of Buffalo combined. Where did the power come from? We are told it was from Niagara Falls, but the infrastructure to transport that much energy didn't exist yet. The power was already there, in the ground, in the very structure of the buildings. The fairs were a way to showcase the new inventions, light bulbs, telephones, phonographs, as if they were brand new, when they were actually the salvaged remnants of the Tartarian world. By presenting them in a controlled environment, the new elite could dictate the pace of their release to the public. They took the free energy of the past, put a meter on it, and called it innovation. The demolition of the fairgrounds after the event was a mandatory erasure. They couldn't leave the evidence standing. They had to tear down the palaces so we wouldn't realise they were permanent. The technology we use today is a hollowed out version of what came before. Consider the vacuum tube. Consider the crystal radio. These are the last gasps of an era that understood the ether. We are told that we moved from vacuum tubes to transistors because it was more efficient. But what did we lose? We lost the ability to interface with the natural frequencies of the earth. The Tartarian world was a world of resonance. They didn't need wires because they understood how to vibrate the air. They didn't need batteries because the world itself was a source of power. We have been moved into a closed system of energy, chemical batteries, fossil fuels, nuclear fission, systems that are inherently destructive and easy to control. We are told this is the only way. Ask yourself why we are still using 19th century combustion technology to move our cars in the 21st century. It is because the alternative, the free atmospheric energy of the old world, cannot be taxed, it cannot be turned off. It is the energy of a free people, and that is why it was buried. The memory of a people is carried in their stories, but what happens when the storytellers are removed? The foundling homes and industrial schools of the late 1800s were filled with children who had been liberated from their families. They were taught a new language, a new history, and a new identity. This is the blank slate protocol. If you can control the education of 3 consecutive generations, you can erase 1,000 years of history. The children were told they were the descendants of pioneers and pilgrims, brave souls who built a civilization from nothing. They were never told about the cities that were already there. They were never told about the Empire of the North. They were raised to be the builders of the New World Order, never realizing they were merely the janitors of the old one. We are those children. Our sense of time, our sense of origin, our sense of what is possible. It has all been curated for us by the people who inherited the rubble. We stand at the edge of a great forgetting. The evidence is crumbling. The old buildings are being replaced by glass boxes that will not last 50 years. The records are being digitized and in the process edited. The people who remember the old stories are dying out, but the truth has a way of leaking through the cracks. It's in the way the sunlight hits an old brick wall and reveals a hidden arch. It's in the way a certain frequency of sound makes you feel a sudden, inexplicable sense of loss. It's in the persistent feeling that we are living in a simulation, a theme park version of reality. Ask yourself, what if the world isn't getting better? What if we are just drifting further and further away from the source? What if the Dark Ages were actually the period after the light was turned off? We are the ghosts haunting our own history, searching for the faces behind the stone. And the more we look, the more we realize that the most important thing they took from us was not our gold or our land or our energy. It was our identity. We don't know who we are because we are forbidden from knowing where we came from. The silence of the great stone libraries is not merely the absence of sound, it is the presence of an enforced stillness. Look at the spines of the books, look at the dates. You will find an explosion of published history between 1870 and 1910, a massive coordinated effort to codify the past. Before this period, the records are fragmented, local and contradictory. After this period, the narrative is seamless. Every textbook in every classroom across the globe began to tell the same story at the exact same time. Ask yourself how a world without the internet or instant communication achieved such perfect historiographical synchronization. It was a project of global re-education. They didn't just burn the old books, they replaced them with better-looking lies. Not this version of the past, not that version. A new, synthesized history designed to justify the current borders and the current masters. They call it the academic standard. We should call it the script. We are players in a drama who have forgotten we are reading lines written by the people who inherited the theatre. Consider the infrastructure of water. Across Europe, Asia and the Americas, we find the remains of massive aqueducts and irrigation systems that defy the capabilities of the people allegedly inhabiting those lands at the time. We are told the Romans built them with slave labour and primitive levels, but look at the gradient. In many cases, the drop is less than an inch per mile, maintained over dozens of miles of rugged terrain. This is not the work of men with buckets and plumb bobs. This is laser-level precision. This is the work of a civilization that understood fluid dynamics and geological stability on a scale we can barely calculate today. And yet, we are told these structures were abandoned and forgotten for 1,000 years. How do you forget the source of your water? How do you lose the knowledge of how to maintain a stone pipe? You don't. Not unless the population that built it was replaced. Not unless the new inhabitants found the pipes already there, dry and choked with silt, and lacked the technical vocabulary to even describe what they were seeing. We call them ruins. To the Tartarians, they were the plumbing. Look at the iron. Look at the old bridges that span our rivers. We are told they are the products of the Industrial Revolution, the pride of the 1800s. But look closer at the joints. In the oldest and most grand examples, you will find no rivets. You will find no weld marks. The metal appears to be cast as a single, continuous piece or fused at a molecular level that leaves no seam. We are told this is standard casting, but the size of the forge required to cast a 300-foot bridge span would be larger than the factories that supposedly built them. Ask yourself why we stopped building this way. Why did we move to the crude, bolted-together steel of the 20th century? It is because their industrial revolution was actually a regression. We lost the ability to manipulate metal with frequency and heat induction. We replaced a sophisticated, elegant metallurgy with the brute force of coal and hammers. We are told we moved forward, but the rust on a bridge from 1950 tells a different story than the pristine iron of a Victorian pillar that has stood in the rain for 200 years without a single pit of corrosion. Return to the photographs of the mid-1800s. Look at the mud. In city after city, Dublin, Moscow, Richmond, Tokyo, the grand neoclassical buildings are surrounded by seas of unpaved, knee-deep mud. There are no sidewalks. There are no finished roads. There is only the majestic stone rising out of the filth. We are told the buildings were finished first and the roads were waiting for funding. Ask yourself, who builds a marble palace and then leaves the front yard as a swamp? Who designs a city of columns and forgets to pave the street? The mud wasn't a choice. The mud was the aftermath. It was the sediment left behind by a global liquid event, a displacement of earth and water that settled against the walls of the old world. The pioneers we see in the photos, with their long coats and their confused expressions, are not the builders. They are the scavengers. They are the people who arrived after the water receded, finding a ready-made civilization waiting for them under 10 feet of silt. They didn't build the cities, they dug them out. The map of North America is a palimpsest. Beneath the names of the states and the provinces, there are other names: Norumbega, Quivira, Anian. We are told these were mythical kingdoms, the fever dreams of explorers like Coronado and Verrazzano. But these myths appear on every map for 200 years. They have coordinates, they have descriptions of stone cities and gold-paved streets. Ask yourself, why would hundreds of independent explorers, separated by decades and nationalities, all hallucinate the same kingdoms in the same locations? They weren't hallucinations. They were the remnants of the American Tartaria. The Native American history we are taught is a sanitized version of the truth, designed to hide the fact that there were massive, fortified cities across the continent long before Columbus arrived there. The mounds of the Mississippi Valley are not burial pits. They are the ruins of pyramids and administrative centers covered in earth to hide their true shape. The Wild West was not a wilderness. It was a depopulated empire. The architecture of control is always geometric. Look at the prisons built in the 1800s, the panopticons. They follow the same radial symmetry as the star forts. We are told this was for surveillance, to allow a single guard to see every cell. But why use the same sacred geometry found in the cathedrals and the forts? Because the geometry itself is a frequency modulator. These prisons weren't just for holding bodies, they were for breaking spirits. By placing a human being inside a specific geometric resonant chamber and depriving them of natural light, you can literally rewire their brain. The reform of the 19th century was the transition from physical torture to psychological erasure. The new masters realized they didn't need to whip the population if they could simply place them inside a resonant cage that made them docile. The star forts were once batteries of life. The star prisons were batteries of despair. It is the same technology, inverted for a darker purpose. The stars have moved, or rather, our orientation to them has been shifted. We find ancient observatories, the pyramids, Stonehenge, the towers of Tartary, that are perfectly aligned with celestial bodies. But today, many of those alignments are slightly off. We are told this is precession, a slow wobble of the earth over 26,000 years. But what if the shift was sudden? What if the catastrophe that buried the cities also tilted the axis of the world? The calendars of the old world do not match our own. The phantom time hypothesis suggests that hundreds of years were added to our timeline to hide a gap in the record. Ask yourself why our modern Gregorian calendar was only adopted in the 1700s. What happened to the missing years? They were deleted to hide the proximity of the last reset. If we knew that the ancient world ended only 300 years ago, we would realize how fragile our own modern world truly is. They gave us a long, boring history to make us feel safe. Even the small machines tell the story. Look at the sewing machines, the typewriters, and the clocks of the late 1800s. They are covered in ornamentation, scrollwork, sphinxes, lotus flowers, and strange geometric engravings. We are told this was Victorian excess. But look at the patterns. They are identical to the traces on a modern circuit board. They are fractal. They are conductive. These weren't just decorations. They were the leftover aesthetics of a technology that functioned on a different principle. In the Tartarian world, the machine and the art were one and the same. There was no distinction between a functional tool and a sacred object, because everything functioned through the harmony of form. We stripped away the ornamentation and called it modernism, not realizing we were stripping away the very components that allowed the machines to tap into the background energy of the universe. We turn the symphony into a monotone. We are told that desertion is the natural fate of failed civilizations. We are told the Dust Bowl was a climate event. We are told the Sahara was always a desert. But the maps of Tartaria show cities in the middle of the Gobi, in the middle of the Sahara, in the middle of the American Southwest. These were not small outposts. They were lush, irrigated metropolises. What could turn a garden into a wasteland in a single generation? Weaponized weather. The mud flood was only one tool in the arsenal of the reset. There was also the fire from the sky, the directed energy that turned stone into glass and soil into sand. When you look at the natural deserts of the world, you are looking at the scorched earth of the last war. We are taught to see geology where we should see ballistics. The erasure wasn't just in the history books, it was carved into the crust of the planet. Who are you? If your history is a fabrication, if your technology is a salvage operation, and if your city is a repurposed ruin, who are you? You are a survivor who has been told they are a beginner. You are an heir who has been told they are a self-made man. The unsettling feeling you get when you look at these old photos is not nostalgia. It is recognition. It is the forbidden knowledge of your own greatness, buried under layers of institutional gatekeeping and academic dogma. The faces behind Tartaria are not the faces of a foreign race or a lost tribe. They are the faces of your own ancestors, who lived in a world of free energy, grand architecture, and global peace. They are waiting for you to stop reading the script. They are waiting for you to look at the windows in the dirt and ask why. The loop is not yet closed. The investigation is not over. It is only beginning, and the evidence is beneath your feet. The silence of the museum is the most profound silence of all. It is a curated hush. We are told that the artifacts behind the glass, the intricate gold filigree, the ceremonial armor, the strange, multi-layered lenses, are the primitive attempts of our ancestors to mimic the beauty of nature. But ask yourself why a primitive smith would create a suit of armor with no visible seams, or a sword made of a steel alloy that should not have existed until the mid-20th century. We are told these are anomalies, a word used by the institution to file away the impossible, so the mundane can remain unchallenged. The museum is not a house of discovery. It is a warehouse of the out of place. It is where they keep the evidence of the world that was, safely neutralized by labels that say ritualistic or symbolic. Not this, not symbols, something else. Tools, components, parts of a machine we have forgotten how to assemble. Look at the clockwork. In the hidden corners of the world's oldest cathedrals, there are astronomical clocks of such staggering complexity that they track the movements of planets we didn't discover until the 1800s. We are told these were built by monks with hand tools and candles. Ask yourself why a society struggling with basic sanitation would prioritize the calculation of the transit of Venus. They didn't. The clocks weren't built by the monks. They were the leftover navigation and timing systems of the Tartarian world. They were integrated into the architecture because the architecture was the machine. When the power was cut, the clocks became curiosities. We turned the dials and made them tell our time, never realizing they were once synchronized to a cosmic frequency that we have lost the ability to hear. We are living in a world of gears that have been disconnected from the mainspring. The water tells the truth because the water never lies. Look at the canals of the world. not just the Suez or the Panama, but the thousands of miles of abandoned canals that crisscross the American Midwest, the Russian steppes, and the European plains. We are told they were dug by men with shovels and mules to transport grain, but look at the embankments. They are lined with stone blocks that weigh several tons each. They are perfectly straight for hundreds of miles. They incorporate locks and siphons that rely on a sophisticated understanding of atmospheric pressure. Ask yourself, if these were built for commerce in the 1820s, why were they abandoned for the railroad only 20 years later? Why would a civilization invest such a staggering amount of labour into a system only to throw it away? They wouldn't. The canals were already there. They were part of a global irrigation and energy transport system. The builders of the 19th century simply cleared the silt, used them for a decade, and then abandoned them when the new coal-based infrastructure was mandated. The railroad didn't replace the canal. It was built on top of the canal's levee to hide the original work. The uniformity of the world is the greatest clue. From the banks of the Ganges to the shores of the Great Lakes, we see the same architecture, the same columns, the same domes, the same classical proportions. We are told this was influence, a global craze for the Greek style. Ask yourself how a style spreads to every corner of the earth simultaneously in an age of sailing ships and horse-drawn carriages. It didn't. The style was the standard. It was the architectural language of a single, unified, global civilization, the Grand Tartary. They didn't build like the Greeks. The Greeks were just a local variation of the global theme. By labelling it neoclassical, the historians have performed a sleight of hand. They have taken a global reality and made it look like a European choice. They have made the source look like the copy. We are told that all roads lead to Rome, but they never tell us who built the roads before Rome existed. Look at the air. In the earliest photographs of London and New York, the cities are pristine. There is no smog. There is no soot on the white marble. There is no smoke rising from the thousands of chimneys. We are told this is because the photos were taken on Sundays or early in the morning, but a city of millions in winter requires heat. If they were burning coal and wood, the sky would be black. It isn't. The chimneys are cold, not this, not combustion, something else. The buildings were heated by the grid. The chimneys we see were not for smoke. They were vents for the circulation of ionized air, or perhaps housings for the resonance coils that heated the stone. Directly, the industrial age brought the smoke. The industrial age brought the grime. We are told we moved from the dark to the light, but the photographs show a world that was far cleaner and brighter before we arrived with our furnaces and our oil. The erasure is vertical. Look at the walls of the great cities, Istanbul, Rome, Mexico City. At the bottom, you find Cyclopean stones, fitted together so tightly you cannot slide a razor blade between them. These stones are not carved, they are moulded, as if the rock itself was softened by heat. Above them, you find the smaller, cruder stones of the Middle Ages. Above those, you find the red bricks of the industrial era, and at the top you find our modern concrete. We are told this is a progression of technology, but look at the quality. The oldest layer is the most advanced. The newest layer is the cheapest. This is not the story of a civilization climbing a ladder. It is the story of a civilization falling down the stairs. Each successive layer is a desperate attempt to mimic the layer below it, using inferior tools and a fading memory. We are the ones at the very top, living in a house of straw built on a foundation of diamond, and we are arrogant enough to think we are the masters of the craft. Water was more than a resource, it was a medium. In the old world, the fountains were not just for decoration, they were living water systems. We find descriptions of fountains that glowed at night, or fountains that seemed to move with a life of their own. At the great exhibitions, they showed electric fountains that were the marvel of the age. We are told they used hidden lights. What if the water itself was charged? What if the Tartarians knew how to manipulate the molecular structure of water to make it a carrier of light and energy? The fountains were the humidifiers and ionizers of the city, cleaning the air and elevating the mood of the population. We turned off the power, and the fountains became stagnant ponds. We forgot that water is a conductor, and that a city built around flowing water is a city that is alive. The greatest theft was the theft of time. They have stretched the timeline of humanity to make the recent past feel ancient. They have given us thousands of years of history so that the events of 300 years ago seem like a different world. But the stones remember, the stones show the same weathering, the stones show the same tech. If you compress the timeline, if you remove the dark ages and the phantom centuries, the truth becomes blindingly clear. We are not the long-term inhabitants of this world. We are the reset generation. We are the ones who were brought in after the fire, after the flood, after the silence. We were given a ready-made history and a pre-packaged identity, and we were told to never look back. Ask yourself, what would happen if we all looked back at once? The investigation does not end because the evidence is everywhere. It is, in the way, the streets of Washington, D.C. form a pentagram. It is in the way the London Underground follows the path of lost rivers. It is in the way your own house seems to have a history that doesn't quite fit the deeds. We are living in a palimpsest world. Beneath the surface of our reality, the old world is still there, vibrating at a frequency we have been trained to ignore. The Tartarians didn't go anywhere. They are the stone, they are the water, they are the silence. We are the ones who are lost, wandering through the halls of a palace we think is a prison. What if the door isn't locked? What if the forbidden knowledge is simply the knowledge of who you were before they told you who you are? The sun rises on a world that is waking up. The Great Reset is failing because the truth is too large to be buried forever. The windows in the dirt are being seen. The star forts are being mapped. The silent photographs are being interrogated. We are the investigators now. We are the ones who are piecing together the shattered glass. And as the image becomes clear, we realize that the faces behind Tartaria are not just the faces of the past. They are the faces of the future. A future where the energy is free, the architecture is grand, and the history is ours to write. The loop is opening. The narrative is breaking. Ask yourself, what will you do when you realize you are the owner of the palace?